Hello, folks. I'm Joe Jarrett with the Missouri Department of Conservation. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar on Missouri birds and habitats. I want to make sure everybody can hear us and that you can see the presentation. So leading our presentation will be Sarah Kendrick with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So she will be talking about Missouri birds and habitats. And I'm your host, Joe Jarrett. So thank you for joining us. And thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, Joe. Excited to be here.
Indeed, birds are awesome.
I agree. Well, thank you, everybody, for having me. Again, I'm Sarah Kendrick. I am a migratory bird biologist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And I've given this presentation many times at bird workshops in the past. It normally lasts about an hour and 45 minutes. So lucky for you, I have cut it drastically to only last about 30 or 40 minutes. So we'll go over an introduction to bird ID. I think it can be a little overwhelming to people who are new to it. And we'll go through a few common species ID and learn a few tips and tricks on how to remember these birds by little stories or just their field markings. And then we'll go over some free apps for your smartphones or field guides and resources to help you get on the path to birding. All right. As we learned last month on the eBird webinar, a lot of people are bird watching. So according to a 2022 Fish and Wildlife Service survey on hunting, angling, and outdoor rec, about 96 million people in the US fed, observed, or photographed birds. So that's over 35% of Americans over the age of 16, which is really
a huge number.
It really is. But to some, again, birding can be overwhelming. So we'll cover some ways to get started and kind of maybe a new way to look at birds to really go down that path to identification. We'll touch on habitat a little bit. We'll mix in a few songs along the way, but we won't spend a ton of time on song just because we don't have all the time in the world. So we will go ahead and get started.
So we'll fly through this.
We will. Good one. So whenever I give this workshop, we're usually together in person. And while we aren't together, that's okay. It still applies. You know, many people are intimidated by birding. Maybe they went maybe they've gone bird watching before with maybe like a know-it-all birder, which can be off-putting. You know, most of the birders I know are generous and patient and kind, and they want you to learn as much as possible. But we all have been around that person who knows all the birds and yells them out really fast, and then you don't end up learning anything at all. But this is a safe birding space, free from judgment. So ask good questions. We'll try to get to some questions at the end. We're all here to learn. So we're all here to help each other along the way. And I will just put in this tip right away from the beginning is to find a birding friend. I think it's the easiest way to learn is to find a mentor or someone who knows more than you. Because quizzing, when I was quizzed, when I took ornithology and got into bird watching, that was the easiest way for me to learn is to be quizzed in the field on songs and what birds look like. And so I encourage you to find a birding friend or maybe just find a friend to learn with. That makes it a lot more fun. And birds are awesome. But you may ask, why are birds awesome? And that, in my humble opinion, is due to their vast diversity. And I'll just touch on a few things here. So birds are found everywhere, from the most urbanized landscape to the most remote corners of the globe. You'll find birds. There's birds everywhere. They eat all things. They eat seeds and insects and lizards and other birds and snakes and mammals and dead things and nectar and worms. I mean, they just eat everything across the globe. They're so adaptable. They nest in trees and shrubs, on the ground, on ledges of skyscrapers, on cliff faces, on rocky islands in the middle of the ocean. These birds make cup nests that we traditionally think of as a nest, but they nest in cavities. They make huge pendulous hanging nests in big colonial nesting colonies of many nests all together in the same place. It's just really mind-blowing. Birds have evolved to be efficient machines. They have hollow bones. Their waste is kind of liquid uric acid, so they don't carry around solid waste in their body. They have air sacs inside their body to remain light and to take up that space so that they can fly. They really just are truly mind-blowing to me. Albatrosses, for example, fly for the first 5 to 6 years of their life, never touching land. The only reason a lot of seabirds even touch land is to make a nest and breed. And so birds like albatrosses fly nonstop for years. They sleep on the wing, they eat on the wing. I know you've probably seen Wisdom, the Lason's albatross in the news. This is the oldest known bird on record. She is 74 years old. She was born in 1951.
Wow.
She's just laid another egg this year, and that's a little video on the right there of her preening her baby this year. So they estimate that she's laid in about 50 to 60 eggs and as many 30 chicks fledged.
Right, go mama.
I know. They also estimate she's flown about 3 million miles in her lifetime, or 120 times around the globe. So this is clearly an extreme example of just one bird that we have been able to track, but there are many instances like this across the world about anecdotes of birds just kind of blowing our minds. So just wanted to touch on that. Just their vast diversity is truly amazing. But I digress. So there's a lot about birds to marvel at. Perhaps when you first consider how to identify birds, when we start thinking of, well, how would I identify a bird if I just saw it right now under a feeder or in a tree? Well, we may think of color first. And so in that vein, field markings are distinctive colors or patterns that stand out to us on the bird. This can be stripes or patches of color, bold markings that we see on the bird. And you can see just from this slide, just this rainbow of color of many different species that we can see here in the state.
Amazing. Are we going to play the name game with them?
Do you want me to?
Like, what are these?
So the top left, I'll go from left to right, from bottom to top. So it's an American kestrel. I'm totally blanking right now. It's a song sparrow, black and white warbler, Baltimore oriole, eastern bluebird, state bird, woohoo, purple gallinule, tufted titmouse, American white pelican, and American widgeon. So
well done. We all just learned something.
Yeah, memorize all those, will you? There will be a quiz at the end.
Okay.
Okay, so then we move to kind of morphology, which is just a fancy word for the size and the shape of the bird, the parts of its body and their form and function. So when we look at this bird on the right, which is an American avocet, it's a really cool wading bird, really long legs because it of course wades in the water. So it needs to keep its feathers up out of the water. So it has those super long legs and that recurved bill that points up.
Beak. Yeah.
Yeah, wiggles around in the sediment under the water to pull out things like invertebrates and things like that. So yeah, so we'll look at the size and the shape of this bird. Clearly, if you saw this bird, its morphology would stand out, not just its color. Then when we think about song, this is a big one in birding, of course, but it takes a lot of practice. We'll point out a few songs along the way. But this is kind of next level birding from being a beginner, is because it does take a lot of extra practice, but you can certainly learn it if you spend time on it. And then habitat. This is a major one that I think can be overlooked. This is just reminding everybody to take note of where you are when you see a bird and maybe what it's doing and where, because behavior can also kind of play into this as well. So I like to start off a lot of these workshops in person by saying, how many people in the room think of themselves as a bird watcher? And maybe you'll get, there you go, we see some hands raised here. And I usually get a few. I get a few people who are confident or have been doing it for a while that raise their hands, but most of a class of brand new birders will not put their hand up. They feel not confident at all in calling themselves a birder. So then I show them these silhouettes. So Joe, if you look at this silhouette, tell me what type of bird you think is the one on the left.
All right. A sparrow or some kind of little wren songbird like that?
That's right. Yes, it is a sparrow. What about the middle one?
That I'm going to say is a robin because of the beak, and they're so common, and the belly, the shape of them.
Yes, yes. Yeah, that's right. What about the one on the right?
Well, that's a good old crow because of the size and kind of the beak, and it's already black. So
there you go. That's a hint. Yeah, and so that's great. And that's right. Normally when I show this slide to people who have even never, don't bird at all, we know the general size and shape of a lot of these birds. So we tend to know more than we think we do. So here's another kind of more elaborate example. But when we start to look at some of the we look at some of these species on this silhouette, we look at the top ones in the middle. What do you think these are, Joe?
Those are probably geese, maybe even
Yes, and
Canada
even if
geese.
you don't know the species, you generally
Yeah.
know the size and shape of a goose. What about this one down here?
An egret or a heron?
That's right. Yes,
You guys
those
can
long
guess
legs,
online
long
too.
pointy bill. Yep. What about this little guy right here?
Wow, I have aging eyes. Is it like a flycatcher or some little speedy bird?
Yeah, a little hummingbird. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So my point here is that even if you look at one of these more obscure ones, maybe you know this is a robin because it's pulling a worm out of the ground, or this one you don't know what species it is, but it kind of looks like a shorebird, maybe a killdeer because it has those long legs. So the point here is that even if we don't feel that we are birders, you are birders. You know common species and you know a lot more than you think you do. So now we'll move into morphology a little bit to talk a little bit more about like the form and function and the structure of birds. So I'm just going to point out some species here that are very different looking, and we're just going to start to get more familiar with describing the size and shape of a bird. This bird is adorable. That's my scientific opinion. It's
It is a
called a
little
golden
puffball.
crowned kinglet. This species is only here in the winter. This bird breeds up in the boreal forest, and we're kind of its tropical wintering range. And so this bird, even when it's freezy cold, it's bouncing around the canopy trying to find tiny insects in, on these bare trees, these deciduous trees where we are. So it's really amazing this tiny bird can even survive. In that cold weather, it's very tiny. This bird is about, I'd say 3 inches long, very small. And you can see its general shape if you saw this bird in a tree. Clearly, if it's showing you its golden crown there, which oftentimes it's a little bit covered up.
Well,
If you see
Adam
that,
is
that's how you describe it. But otherwise, it kind of looks like a little ball with a beak. It doesn't
right,
have
and
like
Adam's
a
loving
neck.
the mohawk. It looks like a little mohawk.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's awesome. It's a really cute bird. But it doesn't have a lot of shape to it other than being a circle with a little bitty bill on it.
Do they get really puffed up? Do they like puff up to stay warm and stuff? Is that what also
Yeah.
kind of attributes to the round shape?
Yes. And you see birds at your feet are puffed up too. What they're doing is they're lifting their feathers up away from their body because the air that traps in between their feathers helps keep them warm and insulate their body.
Oh.
Yeah. So then we look at a very different species. This is a scissor-tailed flycatcher. This is probably one of everyone's favorite birds if you ever see one in real life. And clearly, if you saw this bird flying around, you would clearly take note of its long outer tail feathers that look like a little scissor. When it flies around, it opens up and fans those long tail feathers and closes them, and they're just a really gorgeous bird.
That's really cool. Where are they found?
They're found in southern Missouri in grassland areas. They can be found kind of
Wow.
southwest and
very,
western Missouri and our grassland areas. Yep,
they kind of look exotic, but they're native. So how cool is that?
they're so beautiful.
We know
Rather,
people
if we
die.
saw this bird, which is a greater roadrunner, which is found in southern Missouri, we're kind of at the northern part of their range over here. This is a greater roadrunner. You wouldn't really see this flying. This species can glide. Of course, it has wings. It can fly. But it's called a roadrunner, and because it runs on the ground. So it has really thick, powerful legs. You might say that it has a big kind of shaggy crest on it with that blue and red eye line, that bare skin behind the eye, really long tail, very stocky. So we're just recognizing the size and the shape of these species. Then, of course, warblers are a group of birds that are very tough. Same with shorebirds, same with raptors sometimes, sparrows. If you saw this bird, of course, you would point out that it's blue and white. There aren't very many blue and white birds, and especially not warbler-shaped ones. So just a really striking, gorgeous bird, but you might know, yeah, it's blue and white. It has a kind of blue necklace and some pretty bold wing bars there on the wing, which we'll talk about here in a minute. Okay, now we're going to move into beaks, which I know most people, when they see a bird, they don't necessarily take note of the beak. But I think that it is a really important characteristic that tells us a little bit more about the bird we're looking at. So when we look at this species and we see this bird maybe on our feeder, I like to show pictures of the female birds because they're amazing too, even if they're not as colorful. And you see this big old chunky beak on this bird. Joe, if you had to guess, what would you think that this bird eats?
That beak looks like it's made for cracking stuff. So like cracking seeds or nuts or things.
Absolutely. Yep. Big old honking chunky bill that, yes, is used to crack seeds. So I tried to cover it up there
Oh.
so it wasn't a total gimme. But this is the male of the species. So this is a rose-breasted grosbeak, and the female is there on the left with that really bold white eyebrow and that bold wing bar right there with some streaking on the breast. And yes, seed eaters. You can tell by that big old chunky bill that they use to crack those. A species we see more commonly that also cracks seeds that has that big old bill is, what's this, Joe?
That would be a northern cardinal, a
It is,
male.
even got the northern part. Well done. Yes, so this is a northern cardinal. This is a species that we see at our feeders. Why do we see it at the feeders? Because we feed seeds, and that's what they eat.
Hey,
They also
Sarah,
eat insects, but
quick question. Within
yeah.
the bird world, are males typically the more colorful of the two
Yes,
versus
typically
females?
yes. Yep, because the females have to be more camouflaged because they're hiding on a nest.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's not always the case. A lot of songbirds and other species look the same. Males and females look the same. But yeah, generally if the female looks more drab or just less bright colors, it's usually because they're hiding on the nest.
Okay.
This species down here on the bottom left is not found in Missouri, nor most of the United States. It's found in the tropics. It's a boat-billed heron. It's just a really, really cool bird. What would you guess this bird does with its bill, Joe?
I'm thinking it like scoops stuff up out of the water, like fish and invertebrates and little stuff.
Yes, that's absolutely right. And so while there are other birds that spend time around water that have like pointy kind of knife-shaped bills for stabbing fish, this one is a scooper. So yes, you can learn a lot by maybe what a bird eats just by its bill.
It's scoopers
This
versus stabbers.
scoobers versus stoppers. That's right. This one you may not recognize by sight, but you would certainly recognize this bird by song. It says whippoorwill, whippoorwill. So this is an eastern whippoorwill. Many of us probably grew up hearing them at our windows and wanted to kill them, keeping us awake all night long. But this is a whippoorwill, and its beak is very tiny, or seemingly tiny. It looks very small. It has those specialized feathers along the bill called rictal bristles. And those are thought to kind of feel the prey that's about to go in their mouth. But when this bird opens its mouth, it may be different than what you would think. So the bill looks tiny, but really that's about half of their head kind of opens up to catch those big moths and insects when they're flying around at nighttime.
So they're
The light of the
catching
moon.
bugs on the wing, and that huge just grabs them. Okay, and you said the little feathers on kind of help them feel the bugs and the moths and things in the air.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
They really
Yep.
are brilliantly designed.
Really, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So let's practice on a few of these. So if you saw this bird, Joe, what would you think that it did with its bill?
I think it pecks at little bugs and stuff because it's tiny and pointed.
Yes, that's right. Yep. So we didn't cover that specifically, but yes, it looks very precise and small and pointy. And
Like
that's
surgical.
exactly what this Blackburnian warbler does, is it gleans insects off of leaves. And so that's why we see warblers usually up in the tree leaves, hopping around because they're looking for caterpillars and other insects on the tops and bottoms of the leaves. So they need a very precise, tiny, pointy bill to do that work. This, by contrast, is a Puerto Rican bullfinch. They're an endemic to Puerto Rico, as you would imagine. And they have that big old seed crunching bill. I know that because I went there to do some mist netting when I was just a wee ornithological student. I got the opportunity to go there with a professor at the University of Missouri, and I had to pull one of these guys out of a mist net, and they got a big chunk of my finger in their mouth. And I can tell you that they really moved that bill back and forth to try and crack those seeds because they were trying to rip off a chunk of my finger, which
Tough lesson learned. Ow.
it did not work, but it really hurt. So you really don't imagine that bill would be that strong, but it's just amazing. So now we'll move into some field markings. Again, those bold patterns and along those lines of morphology. So this is just a very simplified picture of the different parts of a bird's body that we start to recognize. So you might say, oh, the bird had a different colored crown, or the top of the head, the nape of the neck, its back, rump, under tail coverts, upper tail coverts, wing, side, belly. You know, it's pretty intuitive, but it's good to start getting into kind of learn some of the terms that can help you point out like where a bird was colored or what its field markings were. One of them that we'll move into here is called the crest. And this bird's skull is not shaped differently. Clearly, these are just feathers that the bird can move to make them point up or down or move them around, usually when they're agitated or out of tension. So this is a tufted titmouse on the left, so named because of the tuft on its head. And you can see that really pointy gray crown. And then the northern cardinal has it as well. They can move those feathers up and down. A species like the Carolina chickadee does not have a crest by contrast. So when we move into some of these other descriptors, you might say that a bird had a rusty cap, like this bird on the bottom right, which is a chipping sparrow. Or maybe it's bigger than a cap and like the black covers the top half of its head like this chickadee. Or you might say, oh, it had a black on the top of its head and a black throat. So a lot of these things start to narrow things down if you were to explain what kind of bird you saw or what the markings were to someone maybe who knows a little bit more. And then there's these other parts of the birds that we just kind of covered on the last slide about back, breast, flank, rump, nape of the neck. Here's an eye line on our chipping sparrow as well that you might notice. With sparrows, they're a little bit tougher. You have to kind of look at the little details. The wing and the back are not going to help you with sparrows because most of them are gray, or not gray, brown and black and gray streaked. So that's not really going to help you. So you commonly look at the breast, whether it's a plain breast or has a spot or streaks. You look at little nuances like what color the cap was or stripes on the head or an eye line. And then a vent is just a different color underneath the tail. So this gray catbird has a rusty vent, whereas the rest of its body is just gray.
Okay, that explains it. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, wing bars. So if you saw this bird, I don't think you would describe it by its wing bars. This is a yellow-throated warbler, and that's probably how you would describe it if you saw it in the field.
Aptly named.
What? Sorry.
Aptly named. Yes.
Aptly named.
That's
right.
Big yellow throat.
So really beautiful bird. This does occur in Missouri. They breed in Missouri. But if we saw a species like this pine warbler that is a little bit more nondescript, it doesn't have bold patterns on the face, it's kind of yellow, olive green overall. With warblers, you need to start keying in on different parts of the body that are different colored. Like you can see that the yellow just goes through its belly, but it's not by the legs and underneath the tail. It also has wing bars. So that's one way to kind of narrow down your warblers into different bins is whether, you know, what kind of markings they have on them, including wing bars. As opposed to our prothonotary warbler here that does not have any wing bars by contrast, but it is also yellow and kind of olive wash overall. So as you get more into birding, you'll kind of pick up on these little nuances a little bit more. Now, this is a black Burnian warbler. We showed him before. This is the male on the top. This is a female or an immature male on the bottom left, which clearly looks very different from the male. And so as we start to get into birding more and more and more, again, you'll pick up on these nuances just with practice oftentimes. And then for our warbler species, oftentimes they go through a molt after breeding and they look different during fall migration when they pass through Missouri, perhaps, than they do in the spring. So it's just, this is the overwhelming part that I think some people can just kind of lost in, but we just have to start somewhere.
It can be a little tricky, but I mean, I think we're breaking it down.
Yeah.
And practice, practice, practice.
Absolutely. So anthropomorphism, I just had to put, you know, a really long word on these slides so that I seem real educated, but this is a big word. Clearly it means assigning human traits or clothing, in this case, also to wildlife or inanimate objects. And so bird names are no exception to this. And so our northern flicker here, sometimes it's described as having a black mustache, maybe a black bib. People say that too in the bird world. Lots of big, bold spots on the breast. This is a horned lark. Clearly, these are not horns. They are just feathers. But it's pretty funny because they do look like little horns. And some birds are named after that. Horned lark, great horned owl. Clearly, these are just they're not ears, they're feather tufts. Their ears are actually down here and very large on the side of their face so that this disc of their face can grab all of the sound in front of them. And then we have a hooded warbler down there on the bottom left. Looks like it's wearing a little balaclava. Just one of my favorite birds, just really, really pretty. Okay, So now we're going to move into a few species that we may not know, that may be a little bit less familiar. And I'm going to ask you what you would notice about this bird if you saw it in the woods, Joe.
I'm going to say the kind of puffy little shape, the
Yep.
pointy beak, which says it's a kind of surgical insect eater, the eyeliner, great eyeliner, and then kind of that ridge along the top that's not quite a cap or a mohawk, but it's like a black striped ridge.
Yeah, those are really good descriptors. Yeah, and you would imagine the other side of its head looks the same. So it's got those bold black stripes on its head. It kind of has a yellow wash, kind of yellow olive wash overall. So this is a worm-eating warbler. And this is the part where I tell all the people who ever come to my bird workshops, whatever works for you. And so whatever works to help you memorize bird names or bird songs, that's what's going to work. And it's not silly. It's not dumb. It's just helping you to memorize. So when I was taking ornithology class, I got this bird on a lab table. You know, it was a prepped specimen of this bird. So it was like a very old bird with cotton on the inside on a stick. Because that's often how you learn ornithology, is with these prepared specimens. So it did not look this clear, but I did notice that it had black stripes on the head and it had this yellow wash overall. Because it had stripes on its head, to memorize it, I thought worm-eating warbler, and it looks like it has worms on its head, which I know is very stupid, but it doesn't matter because it helped me memorize it, and really whatever works. So whatever works for you to kind of get that in your mind of how a bird looks or how it sounds, that's great. So with this one, this is a great example of how a female is a little bit more flashy than the male. So what do you notice about this bird, Joe?
Well, I know what this bird is because I've seen it quite a bit on the rivers. The big beak, that's for like catching stuff. The big crest, the steel blue color, and then the brown red on the breast.
Yeah, that's a great description.
That beak is, yeah, that thing eats live things.
That's a stabby. That's a stabby beak.
It's a stabby, yes. Not a scoopy, a stabby.
Yes, it's a stabby. So yes, the first things that pop out are that huge shaggy mohawk crest.
It looks like an 80s punk rocker, Adam. Yes, it does.
It does. And it's got that stabby bill, for catching fish. And yes, the females actually have the rusty belt and the males do not. So if you see one of these belted kingfishers that don't have the rusty belt, that's a male. And if it has the rusty belt, that's a female.
Good to know. That's a really good tip.
Yeah, so these are two species that if you're lucky and you live in a wooded area with lots of trees, you may see the bird on the left at your feeder, but you'll almost assuredly see the bird on your right if you have suet feeders or any feeder in your backyard. So Joe, just at first glance, pretend you've never seen these birds before and give me a general description of what you think they look like.
Well, I'm going to say the one on the left is like the flag bird because it's red, white, and blue. It looks like big red head and like chest with white and a blue or black back on the wings. That's what would stand out. And the beak. So is this a kind of woodpecker?
Yes, these are both woodpeckers. And it's really interesting. I want to point out how you describe these birds. You said that they both have white on the breast, that they have black and white on the back. So even though because the description could apply to both of these birds, even though they look very different. So you can practice this type of description at your feeder of noticing details, the patches of color, not just the color, but the patterns of the color. Maybe on the left bird, which is a red-headed woodpecker, you might say, well, the red went all the way around the head down to like a bib. Or you could say it has big blocks of color, whereas the bird on the right clearly looks like a zebra on the back, right? Really black.
Yeah, that's the big difference. And the red only, it's like a crest or a big mohawk that goes down.
Yes, they definitely have, a mullet or a
mullet, yes.
That red mullet, yes. And the females don't have red right above the bill. So that's how you can tell the difference on red-bellied woodpeckers, because they have like a white patch right above their bill, but then that red mohawk kind of extends down the back.
Right, another pro tip, thanks.
Yeah, so when you try and look them up in a field guide or on a free, phone app that I'll tell you about later, these are just the types of things we want to try to memorize very quickly if we see a bird. Oftentimes they fly off, and so we kick ourselves. Why didn't I look at it closer? So one thing that helped me when I started with Bird ID is I would look at the bird, but really quickly try and memorize different parts of it. I see your comment, Debbie, and that's not true. They have a reddish wash on their belly, which you can't see very well, but that is why they're named that. But yeah, you might describe the one on the right as a red-headed woodpecker too, but it's a red-bellied woodpecker. Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. It is the same. I wish they just named it a zebra woodpecker or something like that. That was a little bit more descriptive. But yes. Okay, so we talked about habitat a little bit more, or a little bit before, but I really want to just kind of point out some very obvious examples here. So the birds you would see in this habitat in a really marshy wetland, like maybe this great egret, maybe this lesser yellowlegs, if you had some mud flats or shallower areas for it to forage, you wouldn't see either of these species in a forest or a prairie or a woodland. You'd really only see them where there's water because that's what they need for habitat. If we were out on a prairie or a grassland area, I think this is Wakanta prairie, you would see species like maybe an American kestrel hovering up above looking for small mammals. You might see a dick sisal on the left side there, or a northern bobwhite running around if you have a little bit of cover or shrubs. So these species, while you may see a bobwhite in some really open woodland habitat with maybe some very sparse trees, you might see a kestrel along the highway, still it's needing that open area to forage in. And so these birds really won't be found in a massive variety of habitats. Really, they need that open structure.
Is this for bluebirds too? Just wondering.
If there are some sparse trees around, bluebirds need cavities to nest in. So they need dead trees, or if it's around your house, they need a bluebird box, which mimics a natural cavity. So you need to have some element of trees or dead trees around the landscape for them to nest in.
Good to know.
So here's our forest. Clearly we'll see species like the scarlet tanager in the top left, red-eyed vireo, broad-winged hawk on the right, which are a forest raptor. They don't really cruise around like red-tailed hawks or some of the like open ground species. These are a migratory species that are only here in the summer, and you'll hear them in the forest. They're one of kind of the few forest hawks we have. And then the wood thrush there, that'll be running around on the ground and in the sub canopy because that's where they nest. So these species you really won't see again in those big open areas or a wetland or other major habitats like that. And then our backyards are habitat as well. So we may see some of these species. If you live near a woodlot or a patch of forest, you might hear those red-eyed vireos in the background, just singing all summer long. They're hard to see, so you'd probably hear them more often than you'd see them. Then we have our Carolina wren, very vocal and loud, Carolina chickadee, and then northern cardinal. One thing that I like to tell people to pay attention to in their bird books or on their ID apps are range maps. And so this kind of helps us narrow down which species we could be seeing in different times of year. So it's really easy to ignore the maps in those field guides, but pay attention. These two species, white-throated sparrow and dark-eyed junco, that are likely at your seed feeders right now on the ground foraging around, they are only here in the winter. So again, they nest up in the boreal forest. You can see in the orange there, that's where they breed. Blue is where they overwinter and yellow is where they migrate through. The species is only here in the winter. So it's a sign of spring for me, not when the new migrants show up from down south, but also when these birds start singing, but then all of a sudden they just leave my yard, leave my feeders to head north.
Hey, Sarah, I would like to add, folks, for more on these migratory maps, Sarah's last presentation was on eBird. And again, they have some amazingly dynamic maps. Sarah, you want to just touch on that real quick?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, check out our recorded webinar. It's at the same webinar website as this series. And yeah, eBird is a massive online database of birder data. They go out and visit an area and enter which species they see and how many, and it's really contributing to science and conservation because it can create these animations of where birds are migrating to and from. So check out that recorded webinar to get started with eBird.
Yes, and a quick question. So again, you were talking about paying attention to the details. And for example, Anna Marie asked, how do you tell the difference between a kestrel and a hawk? And that's where you get into kind of what we were talking about, those subtle differences, shape, size, color.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So the difference between a kestrel and a hawk. So hawks are just a different family of birds. They're just genetically different, but so a kestrel is a falcon. It's our smallest falcon. Of course, we have peregrine falcons and prairie falcons sometimes in the States. And falcons and hawks are just genetically different. They're different. There are little nuances about their size and shape and bodies that make them different, of course. But yeah, all of that just kind of comes with time and knowledge and practice. And so I have this raptor slide up right now. And this is one trick that I have done with sparrows in the past. So I used to do winter bird counts. I do a Christmas bird count, which is a nationwide count conducted by the National Audubon Society. And it always used to perplex me because I was really trying to focus on my sparrows and learn my sparrows. So this is one trick that I use for sparrows, also use for raptors, to break them down by time of year. So I just made a short list from my field guide of, okay, it's winter. Which species, which sparrows are even here in the winter? So I just made a short list for myself on a Post-it. I put it inside my field guide. And after 2 or 3 years of practicing this intently during the winter, you start to catalog that stuff in your mind of which species are here during which time of year. So it really does just take practice. But it can also help with raptors. You know, the species on the left are only here in the winter. There's quite a few that are here year round. That Merlin down there is migration only, and then that broadwing hawk that we saw in the forest a few slides ago, that one's only here in the summer. So if you kind of chunk them out like that, it becomes a little less overwhelming. So you're not trying to ID like 30 sparrows that can occur in the state, but really it just narrows it down to like 6, 7, or 8. So we're going to move into just like a handful of species, pretty common ones. We'll walk through a little bit of the bird's plumage and some kind of interesting tidbits about each of them. So this is a tufted titmouse. This is a common one in our feeders. You know, it eats seeds, but this is a little bit different than what we've been taught so far about the beak shape, right? But that just means that this bird uses a different strategy. So titmice don't have the bill that can crunch down seeds, right? So they have to pick one seed at a time, go to a nearby branch or a perch. They hold the seed between their little feet in that picture right there, and they stab at it with that little bill to break open the seed. So it takes them a little bit longer because they can't just crunch them in their bill like cardinals that just sit on a platform feeder and pig out sitting there.
Right, that's a lot more work for these little guys.
They do, yes, yes. And so they also eat insects. So we said on the last presentation, the eBird presentation, I believe, that 96% of all of our land birds, songbirds, need insects, because even if they eat seeds day to day, like this titmouse does, and in the winter, they're still eating insects in the summer, and they still need to feed soft insects to their young in the nest. And so insects are incredibly important as well. So a lot of these seed eaters are omnivorous because they eat insects as well. Okay, northern cardinal. This one's kind of a go-to. The male's on the left, bright red with the black on the face, and then the female is, I think the female is just as beautiful as the male.
Oh,
she
yes.
just looks so much different. But that big old red bill is just so beautiful. Their song is really variable, but I wanted to play it because I don't think it's super obvious to all of us. It's kind of a loud string of clear whistles. I'll just play it real fast. Oops.
We're not hearing that.
Okay.
Is your sound up?
Yeah, do you want me to exit and turn my sound on, or you just want me to keep going?
Oh, I don't want you to exit in case something happens, so we'll keep going if that's okay. Sorry, folks.
Okay, we'll just keep going. Apologies, everybody. So this is a blue jay. This is a very loud, gregarious species. Sometimes it can be known as a bully because it's just a little bit more aggressive. It just knows what it wants, this species.
They're very assertive.
What? Yes, they're just
very
being
assertive.
a blue jay. So they can defend their nests and their young aggressively. These birds are omnivores. They eat a lot of different things. They can also eat the young of other birds. So they can be predators as well. But they are huge seed dispersers. They help vegetate the U.S. in particular with oaks. And so these birds cache acorns all over the place. You'll see them in the fall. If you know what you're looking for, you see birds fly back and forth, and you can tell from their silhouette that they have acorns in their bill because it's not pointy like a bill. And blue jays and a lot of other species cache acorns. And so luckily for oaks, they forget a large percentage of where they cached those acorns. And so they plant a lot of oaks, which is kind of cool.
Great. Thank you, Blue Jays.
Yeah, exactly. So this is our black-capped and Carolina chickadee. I think most people know this species, but an interesting thing about them, you know, they have that black top of the head, black throat, little puffball, just very small, very active species that comes to our seed feeders. They're another one that has to tap on those seeds to break open that outer shell to get at the meat inside. But this species has a hybrid zone right through the middle of the state. And so it can be very difficult to tell which species it is. According to some, they think it's impossible for you to tell which species is which if you're in that hybrid zone in the middle of the state. But this is an example of really very small nuances of telling these species apart. So on the left side, this is a black-capped chickadee on the left and a Carolina chickadee on the right. And while their songs can be different, the chickadee on the left, the black-capped, has a 2-note song. It's just 2 notes generally, and the Carolina chickadee goes. They have 4 notes, which some people remember it by that one saying Carolina, and so that can help you. But also, there's a lot of white in the primary feathers in the black-capped chickadee compared to the Carolina. So it's just a very, very subtle differences that I don't expect new birders to notice right away, but it just gives you a little indication of how, if you really get into this, you'll never get bored with bird watching, I think.
So I guess if we can just say, hey, that's a chickadee, and it's either a black-capped or a Carolina, I'm not sure, that's still a win, right?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. This is a white-breasted nuthatch, and they are very fun because they will crawl up and down branches and the trunk of trees upside down. They don't care. They have huge, powerful feet that can help them to grip and hang upside down on suet feeders. And their neck bends at like a 90 degrees. So oftentimes they'll go down branches and then look straight up. So they have very stretchy necks. This species is found in like woodland, forest, also urban areas if you put out suet feeder. And they're a cavity nester. I can't play their call, but they go wah, 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 wah. I'm just going to do imitations of the bird song.
I like it. And that's a stabber too, right? Is that thing eating insects underneath the bark of trees and such?
That's absolutely right. Yeah, great guess. Yeah, it helps them to rip off that suet, but also, yes, it helps them to pull up bark and find insects underneath.
Yeah, right. What's that sound? What's the call they make?
Gosh, stop. They go, wow, 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 wow. I know this is going to help. This is going to help everybody.
Helpful. It is helpful.
Okay, this is a Carolina wren. And wrens are amazing. They are so feisty. They're very small. They're very powerful. They have big, stocky legs. They never sit still.
They're like the chihuahuas of the bird world.
They are. They are. They're very powerful. They're loud. We all know someone in our life, I think, who reminds us of a wren. Big, bold, white eyebrow, very dark, rich brown back, and then that rusty wash underneath. They perch like this a lot with their tail cocked up like that, just straight up. Again, super active, always bouncing around and never really sitting still. They're kind of a forest woodland bird. There are brush piles and shrubby areas for them to hang out in. They nest in small, tight spaces like this. If we leave boots or we leave our garage door open for a day or two during breeding season, they will build half a nest during the day with the door open if you're not careful. They'll nest in really tight, cramped spaces like a pot with a flower in it or your shoe. And I just wanted to point out the difference between a Carolina wren and house wren that you see on the right there with no bold eyebrow and just not as brown.
Okay, Sarah, quick question. Some of these nests, like inconvenient places, granted, in your boot and such, is there a quick reminder when birds are nesting, are they all federally protected, so you can't disturb the nest while it's an active nest, or what?
Yeah, that's a very good point to bring up. Thank you for doing that. Yes, according to the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, we can't disrupt any bird nest when they're breeding. And so if the bird hasn't laid an egg in it yet, you can move the boot or you can take the material out of the shoe, or if it's in an inconvenient place. But once that bird lays an egg, that nest is protected, yes, and yeah, you can't mess with it. You got to let the bird go about its business. If this happened in my shoe with like in an open garage, I would move the boot outside. But yeah, we ask that you don't. Well, it's federal regulations to not mess with, yes, an active nest.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah, eastern bluebird. I'm going to kind of cruise a little bit faster here because I'm kind of running out of time. I want to leave a little bit of time for questions. So here's our bluebird. It's our state bird. The males are just that really gorgeous blue on the back and rusty colored on the front. Females are a little bit more drab, just kind of softer colors than the male. And of course, they're a cavity nester, which is why they use bluebird boxes that we put out. This is an indigo bunting. This is a bird if you live near a woodlot or a shrubby edge. These generally aren't found in neighborhoods. You have to be kind of on the edge of a forest or have some trees and shrubs around or live on property. So this is an indigo bunting, male on the top left in the sun. This is a male on the bottom left in the shade. So they look very different in the sun and the shade.
Very different, yes.
Female is on the right, again, very drab to hide on a nest. And one interesting tidbit is there are no blue birds. So birds usually get their colors from pigments deposited in the feather. These are true colors in the feather composition. Think like flamingos eating shrimp, and that's why their feathers are pink.
Okay.
But blue is a structural color, and that means that light hits the structure of the feather to make us humans see blue. And so other birds may see them as gray or brown, but we see blue just because of how the light interacts with our eyes, which is lucky for us.
Fascinating.
This is a male that is molting into its adult blue plumage.
That's really pretty, though, even during the molting, the little bits.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Okay, eastern towhee. These are a bird that will be in kind of a shrubby area. You might hear some rustling around on the ground. This bird forages on the ground. It kicks back leaves with its big, powerful feet and looks for insects underneath. The males are black on top, and this bird used to be called a rufous-sided towhee because of those rufous, rusty-colored sides, but they changed the name. And the females are on the right, and they have swapped out the black on the male for brown, again, to hide. And these birds, when they sing, they say, "Drink your tea."
Drink your tea.
This is an eastern phoebe. This is a flycatcher. It's pretty drab overall, but I put them on here because they're quite common. Because you may see them like this. You may see them making mossy nests on top of your light on your house or around your doorway or on literally any edge or ledge they could find. This bird in natural areas makes its nest on rock faces before we conveniently put houses all over the woods for them to build nests on. And these birds flick their tails when they perch. It's kind of like a tick. When they just can't stop flicking their tail, and they say, "Phoebe, Phoebe, Phoebe,
Phoebe." Were they named for their song, or is that just happenstance?
I think they are. I mean, it sounds exactly like saying Phoebe,
Yeah.
and there are quite a few birds that are named after their song, like whippoorwill and peewees and stuff like that. Okay, great crested flycatcher. This one you almost certainly hear more than you ever see it. This bird, it normally breeds in our backyard in the middle of town, but we have some big trees. And I cannot hardly get my eyes on this bird when it's making noise right in front of my face. They are masters of disguise. They just blend in to the leaves so well. And they're just such a cool looking bird. They have like reddish in the wing you see there, kind of reddish on the undertail, but a yellow wash on their belly. And they have a little bit of a crest. But they're just a really cool flycatcher. They sally, they fly out and grab insects and go back to a perch. They're just really, really cool. They need dead trees, though, because they nest in cavities, which is kind of cool for a flycatcher.
Good to know. And what's the song it makes?
Dang it, Joe. They go, "Reap! Reap!"
When you're good, you're good, Sarah.
Okay. So this is a ruby-throated hummingbird. Clearly, we all know this one. The male is on the left with that bright red iridescent gorget. It's called a gorget on its throat. The females do not have it. You can see there on the right. A little bit more plain Jane there. But these birds are found in woodland forest. But of course, they also come to feeders because when we put out sugar water, we're mimicking nectar. These are nectar-feeding birds with that long, long tongue right there that they can stick into the insides of flowers or, in this case, the hummingbird feeder.
Right, and as you mentioned before too, the adults feed on nectar, but they also need a bunch of bugs when they're raising their little ones, right?
Absolutely, even hummingbirds. Yep, they feed them teeny weeny insects. Yep, absolutely. This is a summer tanager. This is one that's a little less common unless you're in a big wooded area or live in the forest. You might not see this one in your backyard, but you're very lucky if you do get to see it. So summer tanagers are absolutely beautiful. They're this just strawberry red color all over their body for the males. The females are yellow. So immature males and females are yellow. And then the second year, when the males molt into their adult plumage, they are tie-dyed. They're both
Oh,
colors.
wow.
They're just really cool. It's always really special when you can find a immature male like this molting into that adult plumage because they look really fun. Baltimore Oriole. This is one of our favorites at feeders. If we put out oranges or grape jelly during migration in particular. Just such gorgeous birds, just really bold black and orange. You might not pick up on those wing bars, but it certainly has wing bars, doesn't it?
Yes, it
the
does.
male is on the left, really bold black, and the female, it has that yellowy wash. Both of these birds on the right are females, which is really interesting that there's a lot of variation with female orioles. And I've read that they get more and more orange the older they are, which I think is really a cool tidbit.
That is cool.
And then, of course, if we put out oranges, they'll eat those. And yes, they love grape jelly. If we put jelly out there on the landscape, put it out about early May when these birds are starting to move through. I really do think that if you live in like a park-like setting with open dispersed trees, they will find that orange on the landscape and come down and eat it. So red-bellied woodpecker, we kind of covered this one, a red-bellied and a red-headed woodpecker. So the bird on the left, there's that reddish wash for you on the tummy. You can see it if you look really hard.
Okay.
But they have kind of that mohawk of red with that zebra back. And then the red-headed woodpecker on the right, just really bold blocks of color, very special bird. You really only see this if you live in like a park-like setting. They like open trees, not like a thick forest, but you need some openings.
Right, and these sounds, because Karen, by the way, is loving these and is going to use your sounds for her class.
Well, so that's great. I can't do a red-bellied woodpecker. I know they go chirp, 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 chirp on their call, but I'm not going to do like the rolling sound. You're just going to have to look it up. But the red-headed woodpecker just goes really loud because the more beautiful a bird is, the uglier it sounds sometimes. And you need to look up the red-headed woodpecker too, because it's pretty much just a scream. It's great.
Okay. Hey, quick, Sarah, we were talking about orioles. So you said we see them in the spring, but what about in the fall? Do they migrate back through here in the fall?
They do. Yep. You'll get concentrations of them in the spring and fall just because there's so many more on the landscape moving through where you are. So oftentimes in the spring, we see a lot of birds, like a lot of rose-breasted grosbeaks all at once at our feeder, like 6 or 7 or 8 I had a few years ago. Or lots of orioles that come to our feeder at the same time, lots of hummingbirds all at the same time as these birds are moving through in waves on migration. And so same thing in the fall, but in the fall, you generally see fewer. I think it's because they're kind of trickling through. During spring, these birds are really excited to fly real fast up in big groups to get to the breeding grounds. They're just much more motivated to start the breeding season and have babies. But in the fall, they can take a little bit more time as they head south.
Yeah, it's kind of like when we go on vacation and we're all excited to get there. And then when it's done, we're like, okay, let's go home.
They're tired. Well, that's the thing. Right. Like breeding season is so energetically taxing that, a lot of these birds, I mean, if you've ever seen a bird feed its babies on the nest, it's nonstop. I mean, it's very energetically taxing, but that's the point. They're trying to continue on their genes and make babies. So it's just really fascinating to think about that annual cycle like that. Okay, pileated woodpecker. This is our last bird that we're going to cover. I know that I only have like 7 minutes here left.
Oh, we're great. And this is a great bird. Wow.
Yeah, absolutely awesome. So it's definitely the biggest woodpecker by a long shot. It's hard to imagine that the ivory-billed woodpecker was about 50% larger than this pileated woodpecker, but you're not really going to mistake this bird for anything else. Huge red crest, just a huge bird. It always kind of stops me in my tracks, especially in the woods. If one flies up to where I'm standing and it doesn't see me, I just like freeze because I want to see it for as long as possible. They're just really, really neat birds.
Basic dimensions, because on the suet feeder, you kind of tell in proportion, but like how long is this thing in the wingspan?
I don't know what the wingspan is offhand, but I'd say they're about 17 inches long. Yeah.
Wow.
They're very long.
Like
they're
the size
really,
of a
really
crow.
big birds. And they're really cool to see fly across the landscape because they just have those big white patches on the wings. And you just mistake them for a whole lot else. They're very cool. Very loud. They kind of laugh at you in the woods. They go, ha, 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 ha. I know, this is great. Okay, So so
Okay.
now we're moving into some of the resources and the apps that you all can use to continue your practice of bird ID. So the Cornell Lab of Ornithology at Cornell University is like kind of the premier educational hub for learning all things bird. And so All About Birds is a massive resource. It's like an online field guide. It's free. It links to the Macaulay Library with Cornell, which is like a massive repository since 1929 of all bird media, all ornithological research media and photos, really old videos. I saw someone mention ivory bills. They even have in the Macaulay Library, like the last video they ever took in the 30s of an ivory bill. You should really look it up. It's in black and white. It's so cool to look at some of those historic pieces like that. And so they have, of course, all these species that you can look through, but All About Birds also has very specific articles on bird ID skills and feeding birds in your backyard. If you want to read about different issues you may have with birds, like FAQs, common problems. I found a baby bird. What do I do? Always put it back. Don't ever take it in your house. You know, the things that kind of come up annually that I know a lot of people at the Conservation Department answer, that I answer all the time from the public. And then bird-friendly homes, how to make your backyard great for birds. And particularly, I wanted to point out this because this is the subject of our, I guess, May webinar.
Yes, we have that coming up in May.
Yeah, which the Missouri River Bird Observatory is going to present on this, on, you know, birds are really tanking. There's a massive decline in North American birds across our continent. And so we really all need to throw in and help in lots of different ways. We can help birds to prevent wild bird mortality and to really just do lots of scalable things in our everyday lives to help birds. So I encourage you to watch that presentation. It's going to be a really good one. Merlin is the bird ID app that is maintained by Cornell. It's incredible. So this is what it looks like on your smartphone. It's also a website, but it's a free app on your phone. They've made it super easy to use, big buttons, big font, really just very basic and easy to understand. So Sound ID is a new feature that they put on the app last year or the year before. And when you play it and you're within good range of birds singing, it makes a list in front of you of what birds are singing. And then if the bird sings again, it highlights that bird to try and teach you what birds are singing. It has step-by-step. So you say, oh, I saw a bird. It was really small. It had brown and black and white on it. You can pick those colors. You say what the bird was doing, and it narrows it down for you and gives you options of what you could have seen. And then if you take a photo, if you somehow magically take a picture this good of a bird, you can, you know, focus in on it and it can give you possibilities of what you may have seen.
Okay, fascinating.
I was looking around today for bird ID apps and other ones that just aren't on my radar that I haven't thought about. And even Martha Stewart cares about birding. She has this really great article that talks about the 7 best apps. So it just shows you in our society how common bird watching is now.
Right. It is like one of the most popular outdoor nature-related activities.
Yes, and it's the fastest growing one. Yeah, it's
yes,
really
amazing.
Yeah, so Merlin and Cornell have a ton of educational material, but there's also another free one by Audubon. They have a free app as well. So just start looking around, see which one you like better. It's all about personal preference. Okay, so this is my last slide or two. So that there is a quiz online through eBird. So if you go to quiz.macaulaylibrary.org or just search eBird bird quiz, you can start any quiz by song or by picture of the bird. And no quiz is ever the same. You can say, I want a list of birds if I'm birding in September in Alabama, and it will pull bird pictures and media just from that spot during that time of year that people have submitted on their eBird checklists or that are in the Macaulay Library. And so it's really great. It never gets old because you have new pictures and new songs every time.
Right, and so focused and handy.
Yes. Wow. Another thing, I'll touch again on finding a mentor. There are some great, amazing, wonderful birding groups here in the state. There's regional ones. There's Audubon chapters you see on that yellow link. That's where you can find websites or contact phone numbers for the Audubon chapters in the state. And then there's Missouri Birding Society, which is a statewide group. And there's just a lot of great ways to get involved and meet other people that are birding to make those connections and make plans. They have bird walks every now and then to go get started. So I encourage you to look into those groups. And then that's all I had for today. I do want to touch on the Missouri Birding Challenge because that's why we're here today at this webinar series. So this is going to be the inaugural Missouri Birding Challenge. Registration opens April 1st through 30th at this website. Just today, a few hours ago, we posted the full rules for the challenge and how to use eBird. We're going to use eBird to track how people participate in the challenge. So you're going to have to study up just a little bit on eBird, but it's very easy to use. The point of this challenge is to encourage people to try out birding by providing a little bit of not a competitive aspect, but kind of goal setting. It was developed to get new folks involved because, again, birding can be a little bit intimidating. We've made 5 categories for different age groups and birding situations. There's youth categories. There's a backyard birder category for your household. There's a dabbler one for people to submit just 5 eBird checklists and reach a number of species. There's a competitive coot category, which is for people who are a little bit more hardcore to try and submit more and more checklists. So this is not a challenge just for people to see the most birds. It's kind of a gentle introduction to birding that's really easily achievable. And yeah, we use eBird. So check out last month's webinar that walks you through that a little bit. There is a small fee to participate, and these funds go to the Missouri Motus project that helps track our migratory birds to inform conservation. And those fees are held through the Missouri Conservation Heritage Foundation. So I encourage you guys to check it out and get active and start birding. I appreciate your time. Thanks for being here.
We appreciate your time too. And we are a little over 7 folks. So thank you for kind of sticking with us with this. Again, we mentioned, but we remind you, join us again for the full annual cycle of bird conservation with our MDC ornithologist, Kristen Heathacre, on Thursday, April 3rd. Come back to learn the 7 simple actions to help birds on May 1st with Dana Ripper of the Missouri River Bird Observatory. I posted links to the birding challenge. You could watch these after. So we'll have these posted in a few days. Again, thank you, Sarah. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. And that's about a wrap.
Thanks, everybody.